The fog hung thick over Nellis Air Force Base, blanketing the runways in a gray silence that swallowed everything. Captain Ellie Morgan sat motionless in the cockpit of a weathered F-16, her breath steady, her gloved hands resting lightly on her lap. Around her, the base slept in stillness, grounded by official order, the world reduced to a faint outline through the misty glass. The other jets remained, dark engines cold, their pilots sipping coffee inside briefing rooms and assuming the day was lost to weather. No one expected movement, especially not from Tail 7, the old jet tucked far from the pristine machines that lined the central strip. But inside the cockpit, something shifted as Ellie reached forward and flipped a switch with practiced calm. A low rumble vibrated beneath her boots as the engine came to life, muffled by the thick air, but unmistakable to those nearby. Heads turned toward the sound, eyes squinting through the fog, unsure if what they were hearing was real. Then the jet rolled forward, slow and steady, ghost-like, through the haze, and a murmur spread across the base that someone was flying against all odds into a sky no one could see. Captain Ellie Morgan never needed to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence was steady like the hum of a grounded engine, quiet but full of potential. In a world where pilots often wore their swagger like an extra stripe on their uniform, Ellie stood apart with her calm eyes and steady hands. Her flight record was flawless. Dozens of successful missions, commendations for composure under pressure, and the kind of peer respect that couldn't be taught. But none of that mattered the day she raised a question about a maintenance shortcut that could have endangered a training squad. Instead of being thanked, she was reassigned. Officially, it was a lateral move to the 314th Test and Evaluation Squadron. Unofficially, everyone knew it was punishment, a silent exile to the forgotten corner of the base where old jets were tested, and no one expected anything important to happen. Ellie didn't complain. She never did. She unpacked her few belongings in the small locker, hung her plain flight suit next to the crisp ones that still carried supply room creases, and showed up early for every shift. She didn't blend in, not because she tried to stand out, but because she didn't seem to care who noticed her at all. Her hair was always pulled into a low, practical bun. Her boots were scuffed at the toes from long hours on the tarmac. She carried a notebook, not a tablet, and filled its pages with sketches of wind patterns and calculations for descent speeds that most pilots left to software. There was no bitterness in her, just focus. She didn't fight for attention or try to win anyone over. She flew her aircraft like it was a conversation, not a performance, and that made some people uncomfortable. To the other pilots, she was the one with the ghost jet, the one assigned to Tail 7, the oldest fighter on the line, the one who still used duct tape on headset cords and carried her own patch kit. To them, she was a warning, a story told in whispers about what happened when you stepped out of line. But Ellie saw it differently. She believed in doing the right thing even when no one watched, especially then. Her idea of loyalty wasn't to rank or reputation, but to the people who'd once trusted her to fly. The crew chief, an older man named Daryl, watched her with quiet approval. He didn't say much either, but he noticed the way she ran her hand along the jet's fuselage before each inspection. He saw her testing systems others had long written off, and when she fixed a hydraulic leak with parts from her own stash, he just nodded. Ellie wasn't out to prove anything. Not to them, not even to herself. But something in her had settled into this place, this old aircraft, and the silence it offered. She knew what people thought. She heard the jokes, the side comments. But she also knew something they didn't. She knew how to listen. Not just to people, but to machines, to weather, to instinct. And while others talked about flying, Ellie prepared for it like it meant something more, like it was still sacred. She wasn't waiting for a second chance. She was building toward it one quiet day at a time, and the moment would come when the silence would end and the world would have to listen back. They just didn't know it yet. But she did. Nellis Air Force Base ran like a machine. Jets lined the flight line in perfect symmetry, polished to a mirror shine under the Nevada sun. Every morning, pilots in crisp flight suits walked with purpose toward the aircraft that symbolized power, speed, and prestige. The newest fighters, F-35s, F-22s, a few Super Hornets on rotation, moved like showpieces in a parade. Their ground crews worked in sync, calling out checks, adjusting sensors, wiping down panels as cameras rolled for promotional shoots. The center of the base buzzed with controlled energy, confidence, and high expectations. But beyond the main hangars, where the pavement started to crack and the paint lines faded, there was a quiet corner no one visited unless assigned. That was where Ellie was sent. Her plane waited at the edge of everything forgotten and left to bake under the desert sky. The area around Tail 7 felt like a different world. The concrete was chipped, bleached by the sun, and stained from years of fluid leaks no one had cleaned. Maintenance carts sat abandoned near the chain-link fence, their wheels locked in place by time and disuse. There were no banners, no crews moving in formation, just dust and silence. Tail 7 didn't gleam. The metal skin had dulled into a weary gray. Panel seams showed rust where rain had seeped in, and the tail number was barely visible, worn down by wind and neglect. The aircraft had stories, but no one asked to hear them. Ellie's walk from the main tarmac to her post felt longer than it was. Not because of distance, but because of everything she passed. Pilots joking in groups, trainers reviewing tablet checklists, commanders giving orders into headsets. When she walked by, conversations dipped or shifted. She wasn't part of the rhythm anymore. At the dispatch table, her flight card was always on top, like someone wanted to get it over with. Spare duty 1 loop, no weapons. The words were said with the same shrug every time, like she didn't matter. Ellie took the card, nodded, and moved on. There was no ground crew waiting at her jet, no clipboard on the ladder, no checklist taped to the panel. If anything needed fixing, she fixed it. If the ladder wasn't there, she climbed the gear strut and hoisted herself into the seat without asking. The cockpit smelled like sun-baked vinyl and dry metal. The seat creaked when she sat down. Systems booted slowly, HUD flickering until she tapped the panel into submission. She knew every noise the jet made and what each one meant. It wasn't ideal, but it was hers. From her seat, she could see the shimmering waves of heat rising off the main flight line. The contrast was sharp. Over there, jets moved in choreographed timing, everything recorded, announced, and applauded. Over here, no one noticed whether she took off or not. Still, Ellie ran through every procedure with the same discipline she had on her first day of flight school. She checked systems no one else trusted. She logged drift curves by hand and sketched airflow over the wings during taxi. She didn't fly missions, but she never stopped flying. The air felt different in her part of the field. It was quieter, heavier, like something was waiting to be remembered. Ellie never said it out loud, but she felt the jet listening. Each time she returned it to its parking spot, she stayed a few minutes longer, just enough to make sure everything was still aligned, still breathing under the metal. No one else looked. That was fine. She saw what they didn't. She knew what it meant to be assigned the corner seat, the last chair at the table, but that didn't change what she brought with her. Not skill, not care, not purpose. That couldn't be ordered away or reassigned. The forgotten airfield had become her space, not because she chose it, but because she refused to let it be empty. Every morning started the same. Ellie would walk into the briefing room with her notepad already filled with notes from the night before and find a seat near the back where no one had to move. The room buzzed with quiet chatter, coffee mugs in hand, pilots trading jokes only half whispered. Captain Brent, always the loudest, never missed an opportunity. He'd glance at the duty assignments, then smirk as if on cue. Another big day for Morgan. Maybe today she gets to test the emergency brake. Laughter followed, not loud, but sharp enough to stick. Lieutenant Casey played the quieter role, leaning in with a dry comment that cut even deeper. She's been doing such good work on the taxi lines they might name a crosswalk after her. It wasn't what they said. It was how often they said it, and how no one told them to stop. Ellie never responded. She took her notes, kept her posture steady, and waited for the briefing to end. When the assignments were posted and she got the same one as always, Tail 7 short taxi, no flight plan, she took the paper without a word. That was the game. She knew it. On the tarmac, the silence grew heavier. Pilots in formation drills gave her space, but not respect. They looked past her, not at her. No one offered help with the ladder. No one asked what she was working on. She moved like a ghost among them. The only one who didn't play along was Sergeant Darrell. He never joined the jokes, never nodded at the whispers. He just watched. When Ellie passed by, he might give the smallest glance, enough to say he saw more than they did. But he never stepped in. Not yet. Ellie felt the weight of it most in the small things. The clipboard that never had her checklist. The headset cord that stayed broken even though others got replaced within hours. The way her aircraft was always parked just far enough away that no one had to see it move. She didn't flinch. That was her armor. She focused on the jet, on the systems, on the math and the physics and the rhythm of getting it right. That was where she found control. That was where no one could touch her. Still, it wore on her. The repetition, the subtle digs, the constant reminder that no matter how well she did her job, it wasn't the job they thought mattered. She was doing circles while they chased flight hours and medals, and they made sure she felt it. But Ellie never asked for sympathy. She didn't need it. What she needed was time. Time with the aircraft. Time to prepare. Because one day the silence would break. And when it did, she knew exactly who she'd be. Ellie stayed late after every shift, long after the others had gone back to their barracks or grabbed drinks at the officers' lounge. She'd sit on the wing of Tail 7 with a thermos and a notebook, watching the way the wind moved dust across the tarmac. Her eyes traced flight paths in the sky, even when there were no jets to follow. Each page in her notebook was a map. Drift curves, thermal layers, calculated push from crosswinds that didn't show up on the forecast. She marked them in pencil, erased, adjusted, rechecked. No app could give her what the sky told her directly. Inside the cockpit, she worked quietly with her hands. Wiring that others ignored, she rewired with tools from her own kit. If the HUD blinked, she cleaned the connections. When the mic cord frayed, she soldered it herself, one wire at a time. She kept her repairs quiet, not because she was hiding, but because no one else cared. The maintenance logs never listed what she did. But every system she touched ran smoother the next day, and she never asked permission. The checklist meant to hang from a clipboard lived in her head. She knew each switch by feel, each system by sound. She tested backups, manually confirmed airflow with a scrap of paper held to the vent marked response times with the second hand on her watch. She understood the jet the way someone might understand a friend, where it resisted, where it hesitated, what it needed to move just right. Others saw a relic. She saw a partner waiting for someone to listen. One night after a long round of diagnostics, she sat with the cockpit canopy open and a strip of tape in her hand. She wrote 6 words in black marker, careful and clean. "It flies if you listen." She pressed the tape just beneath the side panel where her wrist would brush it during flight. Not a message for anyone else. Just a reminder. The aircraft was old, but not broken. It had memory. And so did she. The world around her moved fast. Shiny jets, loud pilots, fast rotations. Ellie moved slow, but with purpose. Every day she layered skill on top of knowledge, patience on top of preparation. Every day she came closer to something no one else saw coming. She wasn't waiting for someone to save her. She wasn't looking for a moment to prove herself. She was building one, in the silence, in the details, in the space between doubt and readiness. And when the time came, she wouldn't have to find the moment. She'd already be in it, ready, certain, listening. Ellie had always wanted to fly because of Dave. Her older brother was the one who gave her her first flight manual, dog-eared and highlighted with his name scratched into the cover. He taught her how to read wind, how to trust instincts, how to stay calm when everything else started to shake. Dave had flown the same jet she flew now. Tail 7 wasn't new even then, but he called it loyal. Not flashy, not fast, but it never let him down. Until the day it almost did. He never talked about it in detail, just said he was lucky to walk away. But years later, after Ellie's reassignment, a package arrived from a base up north. It was addressed in Dave's handwriting. Inside was a folder full of records and a note that didn't need many words. "If you're reading this, it means they're trying to shut you down too." She sat with it for hours, flipping through maintenance reports, handwritten logs, internal memos he wasn't supposed to have. He hadn't just survived a malfunction. The throttle linkage on his jet had been tampered with, replaced with substandard parts to meet a quota. His report had been buried. He'd followed protocol, filed complaints, sent memos through the chain. And the response was silence. Then a transfer. Then a desk job. Ellie hadn't known the details until now. But once she saw them, she couldn't look away. She traced the names on the paperwork. One of them was on her own reprimand slip from 3 weeks ago. Different years, same pattern. People who raised alarms got sent away, or ignored, or broken down until they stopped trying. It wasn't just that they didn't believe her. They needed her quiet. The more she saw, the clearer it became. She wasn't flying taxi routes because they didn't trust her. She was flying them, so no one else would listen to her again. That night she sat in the cockpit with Dave's folder on her lap. The aircraft creaked in the cooling air, metal contracting almost like breath. She read every line again, even the ones she already knew by heart. Each page was a thread she wasn't willing to drop. The next morning she showed up early, not to complain, not to argue, but to work. She redid every test, calibrated the backup systems, rechecked pressure seals by hand. She memorized the checklist for the third time in a week. She found strength in motion, in rhythm, in sweat on her back and dirt under her nails. She didn't care if anyone saw. She wasn't doing it for them. She was doing it because she refused to let Dave's story fade into a forgotten report. He'd trusted her with the truth. Now it was hers to carry, not to file away, not to shout about, but to prove, and the only way she knew how to prove it was in the air. She started studying the weather reports, watched fog patterns build over the ranges, calculated how visibility would shift hour by hour. She marked days on a small calendar, made notes in the margins about wind shear and ambient humidity. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. She didn't need to. What she was planning couldn't be explained in meetings. It had to be seen, felt, understood in the quiet. Every time she climbed into the cockpit, she touched the strip of tape with 6 words. She said them in her mind like a promise, not to the squadron, to herself, to Dave, to the aircraft that had survived what it never should have. She wasn't chasing a stunt. She wasn't looking for redemption. She was preparing to speak the only language the Air Force couldn't ignore. A clean takeoff, a perfect flight, a landing no one believed possible. She wasn't afraid. Not of the fog. Not of the fallout. She'd already lost the version of her career they wanted her to protect. What she had left was something harder to define: integrity, legacy, and a deep, unshakable belief that truth had weight, even if no one wanted to hold it. If they wouldn't listen to her words, maybe they'd listen to the sound of landing gear touching runway in 0 visibility. Maybe then they'd understand. Maybe then they'd realize the difference between flying for show and flying because it matters. She didn't need the whole base to cheer. She just needed them to see it happen. And once they did, nothing could be covered up again. Not her, not Dave, not the truth. Ellie woke before dawn, her room dim and quiet, the air heavy with the stillness that came before something changed. She had tracked the fog for days, watched it build over the mountain range, creeping closer with each passing hour. Now it had arrived, blanketing the base in a thick gray veil that blurred edges and swallowed sound. Outside, the world had vanished. Runways, towers, even the distant hangars all disappeared into the mist. Most of the base would remain grounded pilots riding off the day before their boots hit the floor. Ellie moved with purpose, dressing in silence, her gear already packed. She walked through fog so dense it felt like walking through water. Lights barely cut through the air, everything muffled, muted. She reached Tail 7 by memory alone, every step measured, every turn already known. The jet sat waiting, its surface damp and quiet, almost as if it understood. She ran her fingers along the fuselage, checked seals, opened panels, and confirmed connections by touch. Her checklist was in her mind, her notes strapped to her thigh. Inside the cockpit, she powered each system slowly, letting the aircraft warm up like breath rising through cold lungs. The HUD stayed off. She didn't need it. Instruments glowed faintly, giving her just enough light to see, but not enough to rely on anything too easy. She switched to the emergency frequency, the one no one used unless it mattered. Static hummed back. Then a calm voice from the tower. No aircraft authorized for takeoff. All operations suspended until further notice. But something in the words felt looser than usual, like someone had left a door cracked open. Ellie keyed the mic once. No words. Just a signal. Just enough. Then she released the brakes. The jet rolled forward, tires whispering across wet pavement. Visibility was down to 10 feet. She followed the heading with nothing but compass and instinct, letting the rumble of the engine and the pressure of wind on the canopy guide her. At the tower, a technician glanced at the radar screen and froze. A single blip was moving, unscheduled, no plan filed, but the signature was familiar. People gathered around the screen, quiet at first, then murmuring, "There's no way. That's got to be Morgan." The blip kept climbing, smooth and steady, perfectly aligned, not drifting, not swaying. A straight ascent in a world where no one else could see the sky. Back on the tarmac, a few ground crew stepped outside to listen. All they heard was a low growl above the mist. Then silence. Then the roar again, climbing, turning. The ghost plane was real, and everyone knew who was flying it. In the operations center, Captain Brent stood near the monitor, arms crossed, but no jokes ready. Casey leaned in, watching the numbers. No chatter now, just watching. The silence in the room said more than words ever could. Ellie adjusted her altitude banking slightly, feeling the aircraft respond like it always had when she got it just right. She didn't need to see the ground. She knew it. She didn't need confirmation. She trusted the work, the math, the preparation, and something deeper that didn't have a name. She flew through the fog like it wasn't even there, not recklessly, not to defy orders, but to show that this aircraft, this moment, this truth, couldn't be buried under silence. Not anymore. Above the clouds, the sky opened, blue and endless. Ellie smiled beneath her helmet, not for triumph, but for recognition. The jet had waited long enough. So had she. Ellie circled once above the base, the fog below thick and unbroken. No runway lights in sight. She watched the instruments, felt the way the air pressed against the wings, tracked every tremor in the throttle with her fingertips. There was no voice in her ear, no confirmation from the tower. Just her and the jet and the gravity waiting below. She turned into her descent without hesitation. The altimeter ticked down slow and steady. Her hands stayed loose on the stick, not forcing the plane, just guiding it, trusting what she knew better than sight. The wind shifted slightly at 900 feet. She felt it in the pitch of the nose, adjusted by instinct. Pressure in her chest built as the ground approached. She scanned for shadows on the fog, for texture in the haze. Nothing. In the tower, the crew leaned in close to the radar. A faint blip moved into approach. Captain Brent stared, arms dropped to his sides. Someone whispered her name, barely louder than breath. Nobody dared to speak louder. At 500 feet, Ellie made her final trim ears tune to the hum of the engine, the vibration of the gear locking in. She counted off seconds in her head, matching them to the terrain from memory. The fog pressed harder as she dropped into it. At 200 feet, the world disappeared completely. Just white. No visual markers. She closed her eyes for a second. Not to guess. To listen. To remember the way the jet behaved the last time she practiced this exact pattern. The moment came. She nudged left, leveled, flared, and the tires kissed concrete like a whisper. In the control room, silence exploded into movement. Screens confirmed touchdown. A technician gasped, then someone clapped, just once, and another followed. Then it spread. Outside, figures emerged into the fog drawn by the sound. Tail 7 rolled down the strip, slow and straight, ghost-like through the haze. Crew members dropped tools and ran toward the path. Even skeptics stood frozen awe, washing over their doubt. Ellie taxied the aircraft into place and cut the engine. Steam curled from the fuselage. The cockpit stayed shut for a moment. Then the canopy lifted with a soft hiss. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She simply climbed down and stood beside the aircraft like she had every other day. Colonel Grant arrived in seconds, jaw-clenched, voice sharp. He barked about protocol disobedience risk. His words cut through the moment like glass across canvas. But before he could finish, another voice cut in. It came from behind him. General Monroe, visiting from Regional Command, had watched everything from the radar room. His tone was clear. She flew with full control in conditions that grounded the entire wing. That wasn't a breach. That was leadership. Grant tried again, softer this time, but the momentum had shifted. Monroe turned to the officers nearby and asked how many had ever landed in zero visibility by feel alone. No one answered. Ellie stood silent, not proud, not smug, just steady. The general looked at her then, not with pity or politics, but respect. That flight didn't just prove skill. It exposed something deeper, something no command report could erase. She became more than a pilot in that moment. She became proof. Of courage, of preparation, of truth that couldn't be silenced. And for the first time since her reassignment, the base was quiet for the right reasons. Not because no one cared, but because they finally understood who she was. In the days after the landing, the base felt different. Not louder, but more alert. Officers moved with questions on their faces, and whispers shifted from mockery to curiosity. A formal investigation began before the week was over. Ellie submitted her flight data, her logs, and then quietly handed over the file Dave had left her. the one with old memos, buried reports, and signatures that matched the very people now scrambling for explanations. Colonel Grant was pulled into review. At first, he denied everything. But documents surfaced, timestamps matched, and others began to speak. What had been silence turned into testimony, each voice making the next one easier. Pilots who'd been sidelined for raising concerns were called back in. Some received apologies. Others were offered new commands. Nobody said the word justice, but everyone felt it. Ellie stayed out of the spotlight. She gave one short statement, calm and clear, confirming her data and her decisions. That was enough. Her words didn't try to prove anything. The flight had already done that. At headquarters, command policies were re-examined. Safety protocols got rewritten. Review boards were formed with a pilot on every panel, a small change that meant everything. The kind of change that wouldn't have happened if no one had dared to fly through the fog. The story moved fast across bases and squadrons, not because it was scandalous, but because it reminded people of what they used to believe, that flying wasn't just skill, it was responsibility. In quiet conversations, pilots admitted they'd known something was wrong. They just hadn't known how to act. Now they had a model. Ellie hadn't fought. She hadn't shouted. She had flown. And that spoke louder than anything else. The culture didn't flip overnight. But the shift had started. You could feel it in the way junior officers asked questions now. In the way mechanics looked twice at old reports. In the way Ellie's name was spoken with something closer to respect. Not because she won, but because she didn't back down. The conference room was packed not with reporters or generals, but with pilots, young ones mostly wide-eyed and restless, scribbling notes between talks. Ellie stood at the front of the stage, not in uniform, but in a simple blazer and boots that still carried dust from the flight line. She didn't need to be introduced. Everyone there knew who she was, not just for the fog flight, but for what came after. The change, the shift, the steady return to what flying was always supposed to mean. She told the story in her own words. Not dramatic, just true. How the fog had rolled in, how the jet had answered, how her brother's silence had taught her to listen more carefully than most people ever do. There wasn't much emotion in her voice. It lived in the pauses, in the way she touched the table beside her when she mentioned Dave, in the way she looked at the crowd when she said trust isn't about confidence. It's about history and feel and choosing to act even when no one believes you should. Outside in a separate hangar, Tail 7 sat clean and ready. It was part of the training program now, not a relic, a mentor. Every new class took a ride in it at least once, not because it was easy to fly, but because it made them better. She walked them through systems the manuals didn't explain, through questions that didn't have right answers, only honest ones. She let them test and fail and learn the way she had, by watching, by caring, by not rushing past the quiet. One afternoon after a flight, a young pilot stayed behind. He was fresh out of school, full of energy but serious. He stood beside the jet and asked her why they still used it, why this old fighter mattered in a world of sleek new machines. Ellie didn't answer right away. She walked to the cockpit, rested her hand just under the side panel. The tape was still there, faded but legible. She nodded toward it and smiled. It flies if you listen.